About 11 years ago, I was 16, and me and my friend used to always go down to the train yard and graffiti the trains. My art was horrible, but I was young and dumb. While we were painting, we heard this diesel-powered train coming towards us with no lights or anything on. We could only see it from the moonlight. I thought this was weird. We were sitting on top of a train car watching for about 15 minutes or so. We waited for someone to get out, and no one did, so we decided to leave when we heard these loud cars coming. We knew something was not right, so we stayed and watched. 3 cars pulled in. They were black SUVs, and then there was 2 black Lamborghinis. The people that got out were wearing all black with sweatshirts, and it was not even cold out. We knew we were not supposed to be there, and we were seeing something we should not be seeing. 6 people got out, and they were all very tall. I would say easily 6'5" or taller. Not one of them said a word. They all had their hoods up, but all of them had bright blonde hair, which I thought was weird. They walked over to the train car and opened the door, which is when 2 people jumped out. We thought we might be witnessing human trafficking or something. When the people got out, they all stood in a circle staring at each other like they all knew each other. My friend then whispered, "Vampires." I said, "Let us call the cops, this is definitely not good." He said, "No, I'm not being caught up in the middle of this." I realized something is not right. These people, I don't know if they're even human. The way they were acting, the way they were moving, and the way they presented themselves, it seemed like they were just something different. My stomach was seriously turning. They ended up speeding off in their cars after a few minutes. Their train yard was next to the highway, and you could see them driving away amazingly fast. We ended up getting down from the train car and looking to see what was inside the train car they got out of. It was completely empty. We got out of there as fast as we could. I said to my friend, we should never talk about this again. Do not say anything to anyone. This happened around midnight if I had to guess. My friend's dad ended up picking us up at this diner that was down the street because we did not drive yet. On the ride home, my friend told his dad everything. I was angry after he told the story to his dad, and his dad said, "Why were you down there?" Like he knew something. He told us to never go down there again. After years and years going by, I was watching a show called Ancient Aliens, and they were talking about this group of aliens called the Pleiadians. I realized that they looked just like what I saw. Just the other day, I and my friend were hanging out and I brought the story up. He got so defensive and said I am not talking about this. I never told anyone except my wife about this story, but I feel like now is the time. I cannot keep quiet anymore. Whatever we saw was not normal. Whatever it was, whether it was vampires, aliens, or just some weird cult, we were not supposed to see this. I love your videos, keep up the awesome work, and I hope my story can fit somewhere in one of your videos. Only once so far in my life have I ever had to worry about feeling like my life was in danger. For context, I am a 19-year-old female. In late August of 2019, in which I was 18 at the time, I began my first semester of college. One of my classes was in a downtown center, which excited me because I love downtown areas. Parking was tricky, so eventually, I started parking my car at a dollar store down the street, giving me around a 10-minute walk to the college building. I did not mind this, as I like taking walks whenever I can, no matter where it is. Every walk went smoothly until the last day of class. In total, I had to go through 3 crosswalks. Each crosswalk correlated with a light, so I would have to pay attention to cars. Before passing the first one, I saw a man on the other side of the road walking. He went into the gas station on the corner of the road, and I thought nothing of it. I crossed, and 2 dudes catcalled me in their car. This made me uneasy, and unfortunately, that feeling would not go away anytime soon. Suddenly, I hear someone yell, "Hey sis, I'm Kanye. Sis, I'm Kanye." At first, I only did a quick look over my shoulder. From what I saw, it was the same man on the other side of the street. However, he was quickly coming to my side. He shouted at me again while my mind and heart started racing. I do not remember much of his appearance. He was much taller than I was. He had a loud voice and had a unique walk to him. Truthfully, I did not bother to look at him all that much. He stuck close to me, constantly trying to get a response out of me. Although some questions were average, like what music I like to listen to and my name, to which he misheard, and part of me was glad about that, some statements he made were weird, such as him wondering when I was walking in the coal for and if I had any money on me. I suppose even with my backpack on me, it was clear that he did not think I was walking to class, as he never mentioned the college. He even tried to get my number, which I refused as politely as possible. Throughout all this time, I could not shake the feeling of uneasiness, along with the feelings of being scared and anxious. Soon, my luck changed. Before crossing the last crosswalk, he told me he needed to take off, which he did, not even a second after saying it. He ran a good distance in front of me, took a left after going over the crosswalk, and I never saw him again. This may not be the scariest situation, but things could have ended a whole lot differently. He could have beat me up and left me on this cold sidewalk for dead. He could have kidnapped me. He could have killed me. He could have robbed me. He could have done anything. I am thankful nothing serious in the end occurred. For privacy purposes, I won't mention any of our names in the story, but I must inform you that my older sister and I have had scary encounters with the paranormal and supernatural over the years. My older sister has like a sixth sense or a third eye, and she can see ghosts, but I sometimes can see them out of the corner of my eye as well. In addition to seeing their presence, although that did not spare me from having the crap scared out of me many times. Just before I turned 7, my parents, my older sister, and I moved into an apartment building that was only a 5-minute walk from the place where my mother worked. The apartment we moved into was on the ground floor, and the moment I first set eyes on the place, I did not like it at all. I did not say anything at the time, but there was something dark and ominous about it. The atmosphere was heavy. I even asked why we could not just stay at our old apartment since I loved it there, and my mother told me that it was due to our previous residence being scheduled to be demolished to make way for new restaurants that were going to be built. Sometime after we moved in, I began to see a shadowy figure of a woman with wild hair out of the corner of my eye, especially when I was alone. I eventually mentioned her to my older sister once we were home alone, after she told me that she did not like our new house because there was something wrong with it. Her face turned pale, and she confirmed that she indeed had seen the figure and that it always seemed to be peering around the corner at us whenever she saw it. She had even seen it when she turned her head, and it had been a solid black figure that seemed to suck the light from its surroundings, even at high noon when the curtains were drawn back and the house was supposed to be bright. A lot of weird and creepy things happened in that house that my parents noticed too. The mildest occurrences were when many times we would come home to find the TV on, and the taps in the kitchen and bathroom open full blast even though we made sure to turn them all off before we left for school, or when we needed to go elsewhere, in addition to doors being open and banging on their own and slamming shut at random. However, my father, being a self-righteous control freak that he was, refused to believe us when we told him about all these things going on and insisted that my sister and I were doing all these things as pranks, even though he definitely knew we weren't touching these things. This would often result in us getting hit with his thick leather belt. My father always called me a crybaby, yelling at me and bullying me because he knew how scared I was at the dark, constantly humiliating me and calling me a failure. God, he was such a jerk. Once when I was 10 years old, my parents had a nasty argument because my mother was confronting my father about another one of his affairs she had discovered, this time with her coworker, and he drove off, probably to spend the night with one of his many mistresses. I remember my mother being furious while he was still present, but once the sound of the car driving away had faded, she started crying. My sister and I hugged her, trying to comfort her, but she made us go to bed, clearly embarrassed that we had seen her break down when she had always appeared strong for us. It really hurt to see my mother that way, but it hurt more not knowing what we could do to console her. I was crying as my sister and I climbed into my parents' bed, and we waited for my mother to join us. We had left the bedroom door open, but barely 5 minutes after we had climbed into bed, the door slammed shut with a loud bang and the lights went out by themselves. I was beyond terrified at this point and screamed as both my sister and I jumped out of the bed and made our way for the door. To our horror, the door would not open, even if it were not locked. It was as if something was holding the door closed. I screamed and cried for my mother as my sister and I banged on the heavy wooden panel with our fist. But we both froze when we heard what sounded like a sigh and a hiss behind us. And in my 10-year-old mind, I was imagining Medusa coming toward us from the darkness. I screamed again for my mother and heard her footfalls in the hallway before the door was yanked open and she was suddenly in front of us like an angel to protect us from the demons of the dark. We ran into her arms and I broke down in tears, gripping her tightly. Wrapping her arms around me and my sister, she led us into the living room, and once we settled on the couch, my sister told her what happened, including the hissing sound we heard in the dark. We all slept on the couch in the living room that night, huddled together under our shared duvet. Another scary experience was when I was 12 years old, and not long after my beloved mother was diagnosed with leukemia. It was the summer vacation, so we could sleep in. My parents left for my mother's checkup one morning at around 8 a.m., and I was asleep in her bed, which is right next to the bunk bed my sister and I use. My sister was asleep on the upper bunk, and barely 15 minutes after my parents left, I heard someone saying, "Psst," from the foot of my parents' bed. I thought it was my older sister, trying to annoy me or get me to do something that she was too dang lazy to do herself, so I did not pay any attention to it and tried to go back to sleep. Suddenly, I felt something change, and then an ominous, demonic growl sounded from the foot of the bed. I do not remember ever moving so fast in my preteen years. I threw the covers off and scrambled up onto the upper bunk where I found my sister still sleeping, but my arrival jolted her awake. Before she could snap at me for waking her so suddenly, she heard the growling again, only this time it came from the spot that my parents' bed that I had just vacated, and we felt like something was glaring at us. Even though it was broad daylight and there was not anyone else in the room but us, my sister and I huddled together under the blanket and could feel that whatever was there was watching us. We lay there, in silence. Since the bedroom door was on the other side of the room, there was no way we could get out. When our parents came home from the hospital, they found us shaking so badly, we almost couldn't speak. When we did manage to tell them what happened, it was obvious they were rattled by how scared we were and didn't leave us alone for the rest of the day. I remember clinging tightly to my mother for weeks after that. When my older sister and I managed to talk about what happened, she told me that one of the things that had freaked her out about the encounter was how white our faces were, and how scared I'd looked since I was always the braver one between us. Now, when I ask her if she remembers that day, she flips out and practically screams at me to never talk about it. Come to think of it, I think she was more scared than I was. Hey Swamp, my name is Mac, and I had a creepy experience with a few of my friends, Jay and Elle. First off, let me say I'm a big fan of your stories, and this is my first time writing. Well then, let's get to it. On a September night, a few years back, I and my buddies decided to take a drive in the northern Michigan area, down some old dirt roads. We were all stoners at the time and had a good high going. Anyway, we drove to one of our favorite smoke spots where an old abandoned barn just sat on the edge of the woods. As we pulled up, we were talking about how Jay had just got the new bong he had. We wanted to see if we could do the best we could to hotbox the entire barn. Dumb idea, because honestly you really can't hotbox a barn all that well. So, as we were joking and laughing, we were walking into the barn and had our phone lights on to lead the way past the barn door, which led into the barn stables. Next to the stables are some stairs that go up to the top floor. The top floor has 2 windows on both sides of the building. Anyway, we made our way into the little barn and up the stairs. We sat and smoked for a few minutes when I noticed Elle was acting strange. So, to lighten the mood, I said, "Hey Elle, why are you so different suddenly? And what did you see, like a ghost?" To which he replied, "I don't know. I just feel like we shouldn't be here." Jay then said, "Why? We come here all the time. Just relax and take a rip." "We'll go home after we got done with the rest of this weed," Elle said. "You're probably right. I just need to take a big hit and I'll be fine." Jay passed the bong to Elle and packed a fresh bowl. Elle flicked the lighter and began to take a hit, while I and Jay were busy on our phones. Suddenly, we hear quick movement coming from outside the barn. It sounded like how a deer or a horse would run through a grassy field. Elle got freaked out and said, "What was that?" Us not knowing and wanting to smoke more, just brushed it off saying it was a deer or something. So, just to see if I could get a picture of a cute deer at night, I walked to the windowsill and poked my head out to see if it was still there. There was nothing. I was kinda bummed that I missed the opportunity to get a pic for my Snapchat to post on my story. I went back and sat down with Jay and Elle, saying that it was gone and I don't know where it went. Jay had a can of soda in his bag and poured it out to clear up his cotton mouth. As he poured it out and popped the can, I began to realize that there were no bugs or frogs making noise. It was completely silent. Having grown up a hunter and being from the Chippewa Salute St. Marie tribe, I remembered some of the things my family told me about the quiet woods. They say when the woods go quiet, that means there is a predator around. I asked Jay and Elle if they can hear anything, and they replied with, "Yeah, this bong bubbling." I started laughing, but then I said, "Anything else?" Elle's face went white and he started getting tears in his eyes. He then said, "I think it's time to leave." To which I said, "Yeah, I think you're right. Let's get the heck out of here." We packed up our things, which probably took a total of 2 or 3 minutes. Still, the woods were silent. We slowly made our way down the stairs and had our lights on from our phones. We made it out of the barn and walked to the car. Out of nowhere, we heard this sheep-like noise mixed with a low-pitched bass. I have never heard anything like that before, so trying to explain it I guess might not make any sense. I started running for the car, not giving any warning to Jay or Elle. I was making a break for it. I made it to the car fast enough to start the engine up and was waiting on them. Elle made it second and Jay was trailing behind due to him being a bigger guy and also had a glass bong in his bag so he could not run amazingly fast. I was looking at Jay, heading up to the car through the rearview mirror, when something further behind him caught my eye. It looked like a 6 to 7 foot tall devil with horns. It was a whitish-gray color, and it was gaining on Jay, and it was gaining fast. I slammed the car into drive, and Elle opened Jay's door so he could get the heck out of there. When Jay got in, Jay, seeing this thing behind him, threw his bag knowing it was just slowing him down. But it did not matter. It was faster than Jay was, and it was gaining on him. We screamed, "Come on, run faster!" Jay made it to the car and slammed the door shut. I pushed the gas all the way down to the floor, spitting up dirt and rocks. This thing chased my car down the little driveway and down some of the road before giving up and taking a sharp turn into the woods. During this time it was chasing us, Elle and Jay were screaming bloody murder. They thought we were going to die. I was paying more attention to the road and what was in front of me. While in a panic, I looked up in the mirror and saw 2 red, soul-piercing eyes staring back at me. After that, the feeling stopped. I did not slow down one bit though, hitting turns at a dangerous speed and breaking all speed laws. Eventually, we made it back to our little town, and I dropped them off telling them to only tell your parents if you need to tell anyone at all, just in the fear that people might think we are crazy. I managed to calm myself down for the drive back to my house and made it home without any problems. But I just could not shake the fact that I felt like I was being watched. I told my dad about it, and he said to never go back there again. That's a territory of something you don't want to mess with. I did some research and asked my uncle, who is a medicine man, what it could be, and I have concluded that it was what we call a goat man. My uncle said that he has seen them a few times on Sugar Island and in the western parts of the UP. Thanks for reading this story. I hope that this can be a warning to you, that even if you have been somewhere multiple times, it does not mean it's a safe place. Hey Swamp, To start this story off, I'm a 15-year-old male from southern Illinois. This story takes place in December of 2018. I was 13 at the time. My parents and I would always get into arguments. You know, the typical teenage mind thinking, it is always right, but after these fights, I would normally go to my room. But for whatever reason, one night I got the idea that a walk would help me calm down. I had to sneak out because my parents would not let me leave. I opened my window and jumped out into the cold December night. Now, I really like scary things, and I live down the road from a prison/mental health facility, so I figured I would give myself a good scare and walk down past them and then come back home. The walk began to go well for a while, but soon got weird. I noticed that it had gotten very quiet. Now, growing up hunting and in the woods and outdoors, I knew that the quiet was not a good sign. But I thought maybe everything was quiet because of me. Maybe the animals thought I was a threat. I don't know. But I turned the corner and noticed that there was someone else walking. I didn't think much of it at first, and I got closer. I realized that the person wasn't moving. They were just standing there motionless. I got scared and turned around, walking faster to get home because I was soiling my pants after a couple of blocks. I finally slowed my pace down, thinking that I was in the clear. I am glad that I did what I did next. I turned around because I felt a strange feeling. And I kid you not, the man was about 10 feet from me. I screamed in shock, but just thought it was someone else walking until I saw his face. I will never forget it. He had a huge smile, like the size of his face was big and his eyes were crazy. They were looking like they were red with a little bit of white. I took off running from my house. I was about a half-mile away. After I took off running, I looked back and to my horror he was running after me. But he was ungodly fast, like I have never seen anybody run before. Usain Bolt had nothing on this guy. Seeing that made me run even faster. I heard him chasing the whole way home, but when I made it to my neighborhood, suddenly I could not hear his footsteps anymore. When I crawled back through my window, I started throwing up from running as hard as I did. Let's just say my parents were even more mad because they found out I snuck out. Besides, I did not have time to close my window. They thought I had gotten sick from being out in the cold for too long. What is even more disturbing is that I later found out that the guy was caught. He had broken into someone's house and was caught in a closet sleeping. I found out that the guy had broken out of the mental health ward and was being transported when he was attacking a nurse and a guard and somehow bolted. I still thank God to this day that he let me get away, and I learned my lesson about late night walks. As a wild teenager, I had my fair share of lucky misses. This one in particular scared me to my core. I was at a friend's house one evening. We were all getting stoned and drinking. You know, stupid typical teenage stuff. I was wearing a white miniskirt, a glittery halter top, and knee-high white heel boots. Yes, I was that girl. At around 12 a.m., I knew I had to be getting home, but there was no one sober enough to drive me. I asked my friend for a hoodie and some pants and then decided to walk the 30-plus minutes to my house, alone. I had done this walk many times before, so I felt safe enough to do so. Except I hadn't done it at midnight, alone. Within the first 10 minutes, I passed the main intersection with no issues, and as I'm about to walk around the corner down the main road into my area, a large green van pulls up beside me. Me being stoned and paranoid, my fingers automatically dialed 111, which is New Zealand's police number. As I dialed the police, a young islander man jumped out of the passenger seat and yelled at me to get in the van. At this very moment, I had my phone to my ear and the operator picked up and asked, "Fire, ambulance, or police?" I replied, "Police, please." Upon hearing this, the young man jumped back into the van and they sped off down the road. I continued to tell the operator a man just tried to get me into his van and that I was stoned walking home. I ended the phone call because I knew I needed to keep my battery from dying as I still had 20-plus minutes to go before I reached my house. At this point, I'm terrified, and my stoner's paranoia is at an all-time high. I mean, at an all-time high. This is a long straight road with only 2 bends in it, However, you can see most of the road from anywhere on the footpath. After the van incident, I started to jump into driveways and hide behind bushes whenever I saw headlights. After doing this consistently for about 15 minutes, I started noticing a white sedan had passed about 3 times. Thinking I must be seeing things, I continued to hide whenever I see headlights and make my way closer and closer to my street. I finally reached the empty paddock opposite the primary school, and I see headlights again. Thinking on my feet, I quickly jumped over the 6-foot fence into the open paddock. There was a massive tree in the middle of the paddock, so I ran as fast as I could and hid behind the tree. A minute or so later, the white Toyota sedan pulled over directly in front of the paddock fence, and out jumped 5 full-grown men. The first thing they said was, "Where is she? Where is she?" They started searching the street for me and were peering over the fence into the paddock. Panicked and absolutely about to crap myself, I dialed the police once more. Once I got the operator, I just kept repeating my name, address, and current location. The operator finally calmed me down enough to ask me what was happening. I told her 5 men in a white sedan were out on the street searching for me as if they were trying to kidnap me. I knew they were looking for me as I was the only person walking on the street at the time. She told me the police were on their way and to remain hidden. Finally, I heard the police sirens, what felt like an eternity later, but was probably only about 5 minutes. They drove straight past the men and they all scattered back in the car and fled. By this time, I'm pretty sure I nearly wet myself and I'm bawling my eyes out to the operator saying they drove straight past. Suddenly, I hear a man saying, "Hello? Excuse me, girl? Are you okay?" I went silent. The man said, "Were those men looking for you? I live across the street and I could hear you crying." I peered out from behind the tree and said, "Yes, are they gone now?" He said, "Yeah, when the police came past, they fled." He then offered me to take me to his house to keep me safe until the police came. So I hung up on the operator, climbed the fence, and went to this guy's garage. He was a lovely guy. He was just working on his car in the garage a few doors down from the paddock. He offered me a warm drink and a cigarette to calm my nerves. After about 10 minutes, it became evident the police weren't coming, so he dropped me off home. At that age, I was young, dumb, and I definitely would have been kidnapped if I wasn't a paranoid stoner with a true crime passion. Stay weird, be safe, and happy holidays. Hi, my name is Brooke. I've been listening to your videos for a while, but this is my first time submitting a story. I need help figuring out what this creature was, even though my friend thinks it was a Skimwalker. My friend Dawson and I were walking around the woods late at night. We were bored and didn't have anything else to do. This was normal for us since we live in Kentucky, and there's really not much to do out here. He was in the middle of explaining what a Skimwalker was when we heard leaves being crunched and rustling around. It was as if someone, or something, was walking just a few yards away from us. Neither one of us thought anything about it, and continued walking. We continued to hear the footsteps as we walked. At first, it sounded like it only had 2 feet, so we thought it was just another person. But within an hour or so, it started sounding like it was walking on all 4s. A few hours later, we were just walking into his backyard. He lives on a farm, and we heard something in the barn. There are not any animals in the barn, so we decided to go have a look. The second we got near the barn, we started smelling something absolutely horrible. We figured something had gotten into the barn and died since it was smelling like rotting flesh. We opened the doors, walked into the barn, and I reached over to turn on the lights. I felt a hand on my arm and heard Dawson's voice say, "Wait, don't turn them on." It weirded me out, but I stopped and waited for him to say something else. I could hear him breathing just a few inches away from my face, and I was starting to freak out. Within a few seconds, I heard his voice again from the barn entrance. "Why haven't you turned the lights on yet?" I gasped loudly and turned on the lights and looked around. Dawson was standing by the entrance with a confused look on his face. When I asked, he said he had not moved from the spot he had been in. He said he had not said anything other than why hadn't I turned on the lights yet. I hurried back over to him and took his hand for comfort since I had encounters with paranormal stuff before. My gosh, this stuff really freaked me out. We walked further into the barn, and he mentioned checking the empty stalls that were in the barn. I reluctantly agreed. We started checking the stalls but did not see anything out of the ordinary. But the closer we got to the very last stall, we started hearing a raspy breathing sound. When we got to the very last stall, there was a deer in it. It immediately freaked us out because the deer was, honestly, inhuman looking. If that makes any sense for an animal anyway. It had bright yellow eyes, and it was breathing loud and raspy. It looked right at us, and as soon as it did, I heard Dawson's voice again, repeating the same thing I heard earlier. "Wait, don't turn the lights on." Dawson heard it this time. Even though it was not very dark in the barn, the area around the deer was incredibly dark, almost like a cloud of smoke. It scared us, and we immediately turned and ran full speed out of the barn. Out of shock, the deer was twice the size. It was a few seconds ago, and it was now chasing us. It was on its hind legs, and the most terrifying part of it was that it was screeching. We could hear it getting closer and closer no matter how fast we ran. It started growling savagely as it chased us. It was letting out deep guttural growls that sounded almost demonic. Once we made it to the house, we immediately locked all the doors and windows. Then we went down into the basement and stayed there for the rest of the night. He moved out of that house a few weeks later, and neither of us have been back ever since. Anyways, that is our story. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think this creature was. We would both really like to know. My story, I guess you could say, is not a traditional horror story, but it is something horrific that happened to me nonetheless, and I know I am not the only one to have gone through this. Mental illness is a cruel mistress sometimes, and due to its nature and some diseases, some people just do not have the capacity to fight and battle their symptoms without help in the form of medicine. My mother would be one of those people. My mother was loving, funny, and there for me when I needed her most. However, my mother suffered from schizophrenia. This disease would be her undoing. My mother left my family, abandoned really, but I forgave her many years later, met some guy online, and then moved out to Hawaii to be with him. That's where her schizophrenia came to light. I am included in this part because it terrified me at the time, and it is relevant. I remember being 14 or 15 years old. I was having issues living with my dad at the time, so I moved out to Hawaii from big old Texas to live with my mom and stepdad. We were driving, my mom and I, before the medical board took her license away, and all of a sudden she looks at me so angrily and states, "What are you saying? They told me you're talking about me. They said you're talking trash." Now, there has not been a word spoken, and at the time, I was not thinking she was anything more than just being annoying in the moment. I replied, "What are you talking about? I haven't said anything." She answers, "They told me you were talking bad about me." I asked her whom she was talking about. She just simply says, "Them. They do." Being 14 or 15 years old, I knew something was very wrong. I grew scared and concerned, but over the years the schizophrenia came to light and we all came accustomed to things like this happening. Fast forward to about 10 years later. At this point I was 24, going through some cruddy things, like fighting my ex-husband for custody of our kids and so on. My mother and I had grown awfully close. She had moved back to Texas briefly in 2011 for a few months to help take care of my grandma, her mom, who had Alzheimer's bad, so I got to see her more than I have in years. She even finally got to meet her granddaughters, my beautiful 3 girls. Due to her illness, she was on government-provided insurance, and when moved, she had to switch it to Texas. When she had to move back to Hawaii, the state of Hawaii would not allow her to switch the insurance for another 6 months, cutting her off her supply of much-needed medications. Now, to the horrific parts. 3 months after she moved back, my family and I noticed the number of calls, and trying to get in touch with her dwindled drastically. After almost a month of not hearing from her, I tried calling and texting several times to no avail. 3 days after telling her I missed her, she finally responded to me, but it was not a response anyone would want to receive. She says that she has done something so wrong, so bad, that once my stepdad Harold finds out, he is going to kill her. My stepdad loved my mother, never seen a love like it. I stated that fact, that he loves her and there's absolutely nothing she could do to cause anything angry from him. We went back and forth messaging each other, her trying to tell me she had done something, but would never tell me exactly what it was, and me telling her he would never do that and asking repeatedly what had happened. She just kept saying it, so finally, kind of as a joke, I tell her if he kills you, then I will have to kill him, to which she replies, "No, you can't." And then almost immediately I receive another one. "You know I'm going to do it myself, and he doesn't have to." My blood ran cold. I was supposed to be going out with friends this night, as it was St. Patrick's Day. We lived in a college town in Texas. We usually partied hard. I immediately canceled my plans and tried to call my mom. She answered, she said she cannot talk, and hung up. So I started messaging her again. She was saying that she was going to kill herself, and that she could not live with herself. She could not make her husband go through killing her. And all the while, I'm trying to find out what has happened and telling her that everything will be fine. I ended up falling asleep as they were 4 hours behind us, and I just passed out eventually. I woke up the next morning with a jolt, fearing that in my accidental falling asleep, something had happened to my mother. I grabbed my phone and messaged her again and asked if she was still here. She responded yes. I tried calling again, and to my amazement, she answered. I started firing off questions trying to make sure things were okay, but she just replies with, "I love you," by the deafening blast of a 30-30 rifle through the phone. I drop the phone, pick it up, yell, but nothing. I hang up and call back a minute later, and my stepdad answers the phone. He is hysterically crying and screams, "Who is this?" I answer him and tell him who I am, and scream that if he did this, I would find him. He brokenly tells me to just do it please because he has nothing to live for now because my mom was dead. As you can hear him drag her across the floor and sob to what I guess was her lifeless corpse. I hang up and call 911. They were at a loss as to what happened in Hawaii, and we did not know who to contact. Eventually, I got a hold of their local Hawaii police station and I told them what had happened. I then called my father and family and heartbreakingly told them the unfortunate news. A little while after this all transpired, my mom completed the act of suicide on the phone with me on March 18th, 2012. Without her meds, the voices she would hear in her head convinced her something had transpired, and the only way out was death. We, nor the police, ever found anything that made us believe she did something wrong. Schizophrenia is its own demon, and hopefully one day we can understand it better. I have PTSD from this event, and even to this day, I'm still affected by it. Mental illness is not a joke. I know this is not one of your scariest stories, but it was one of the most horrific things to ever happen to me. Thank you for reading this, and thank you for sharing my story. When I was younger, about 5 years old, my family moved houses. Being as I was so young, I was devastated. I have been living my whole life in this area. I had made memories there. That is where I helped my dad paint the walls. It is where I played Foursquares with the big kids. It's where I made a lot of cool friends. It's also where I had my best friend / frenemy neighbor and buried her second favorite doll. With the move, my family was very busy packing and saying our goodbyes and the like. I don't remember who, since it was 20 years or so now, but someone was taking pictures of the house inside and out so that my grandpa could build us a miniature wooden model of our old house. At that point, my sister and I were talking to the people we sold our house to, a seemingly kind, nice family. A mother, a father, and if I recall right, 2 daughters, basically the same dynamic of my own family. I do not remember the conversation, but the basic gist of it was something like, "Enjoy my room and please take care of my house." Naturally, they promised to do so with smiles. Come a few years later, and a lot of things change. My parents began arguing more, and I started at a new school. I got transferred a lot as new schools were being built by my house. One day I came home from school to find that my parents had come across some jarring news about a murder that took place in our old neighborhood. A story about how a husband murdered his wife in their bedroom while the eldest kid was at school and the youngest was in the other room. Beneath the story was a photograph of my old house. The story itself was already chilling without my mom looking at my dad and murmuring, "That was in her bedroom. It could have been us." My dad assured her that that was nonsense and their bickering slowed for a while. I thought that was the end of it. It was creepy and, to a child like me, disrespectful. But even 7 years old, I understood that murder happened. This one just so happened to hit very close to home. Things started to get strange though. My sister and I would wake up sometimes to hear a baby or a young child crying. This I remember clearly, as it was my first wholly lucid supernatural experience. Like a child, too young to remember much for myself other than my parents' tales, I was terrified by these large black boars with glowing red eyes. I would wake up and start screaming. My mom chalked it up to night terrors, but I was and still am convinced that these were demons, especially after my tween years of research and coming across an article about boars being a sign of demons. But this is a story for another time. The point is I have dealt with the supernatural before, even if I did not really remember it. Getting back on track though, I had been lying awake when the crying began. I recall frowning and then getting up to yell at my sister for playing with her baby doll so late at night. She shot up and looked at me with horror and said that she was about to yell at me for the same thing. We casted a glance at my brother's room, but he was just a baby and he had no baby dolls of his own. We ran into my parents' bedroom screaming about ghosts. Unfortunately for us, we interrupted them in a private moment, if you catch my drift. So they were extremely Sonic the Hedgehog quick about ushering us out of the room. They said something like, "Your grandma was planning on dropping by, you just heard the garage opening." Both of us knew that was garbage, because we knew the garage doors did not make that much noise, and that grandma was not stopping by at 12:30 at night. We both slept in the same room that night. Over the next few years, things kept on escalating. My parents' wedding rings would disappear, wall crosses would be rotating, my sister's friends would have a sleepover at her house while I was away and would say that they thought they could hear my voice and stuff like that. After years of dealing with it, we noticed a common theme: the basement. As cliché as that might sound, that's where the activity seemed to radiate from, along with my room and my parents' room. Missing objects would always end up in the basement. We always got the worst vibes from down there too, and my sister and I did not like being down there, especially alone. Eventually, we came to notice that the miniature version of our old house would have been put in the basement. The two of us speculated that it was kind of a beacon to the ghosts due to its representation of a place where someone had been murdered. We assumed that it was drawing spirits. My sister wanted to burn the thing, but I protested, as I was pretty sure I read something on how burning an object that supernatural things are attached to will only unleash the things attached to it. But a roaring house fire eventually killed everything in the house. Unlike the activity that continues though, perhaps with more force than before. Perhaps the murder in my former home and my supernatural experiences are just unconnected coincidences. Perhaps not. Either way, it is chilling to know that someone had been murdered in my old house, and I cannot help but wonder if they had seen any red-eyed black boar around the house before it happened. I worked as a car detailer at a dealership for a few years. The boss had a small truck towed in one day and asked me and another detailer to see if we could clean it out. We had taken care of some bad-smelling and filthy vehicles before, so we figured this was the same kind of deal. We were dead wrong. Before even opening the truck, we smelled it. Nasty, rotten thick air surrounded the truck. I asked my coworker if he ever smelled anything like it. He shook his head. I walked over and opened the door. The smell of something dead rushed out. It was overwhelmingly sickening. I went and talked to the boss about the unbearable smell. He was trying to get some money out of it. The guy who bought it died not long after purchasing the truck, so if possible, he wanted to get it back to selling condition. He said he wanted the seats gutted because he bought all new seating. I still informed him cleaning it was nearly impossible. The smell was making everyone sick. I pretty much said I need some type of breathing apparatus for myself and anyone brave enough to help me try to clean the vehicle out. So he bought us painting jumpsuits and full-face mask. It did help a bit. If we did not have those items, it would not have been possible. The guy I worked with was a veteran detailer. He had many years of cleaning up and detailing cleaning vehicles under his belt. He told me he had never had a case like that truck. We began to take apart the car and bag the old seats in plastic bags. We shampooed the carpets and washed out the engine. We scrubbed and conditioned the vinyl of the dash and interior. It was looking way better. We attached the new seats and looked for anything else we could clean up to try to get that lingering smell out. My coworker sat in the driver's seat and contemplated buying the little truck. But we both forgot a major place to clean up. He reached down and turned the AC full blast. A bunch of little brown and black things flew at him. All over his face and chest, these things hit him. The smell was there again. We tried everything we could, but whatever happened in that truck was not able to be washed off. We got close, but when it would sit in the sun for any amount of time, the smell would always be back. We later found out what happened. Apparently the guy died in the truck. They did not find him for a while. By the time they found him, he was swollen and split and was covered in maggots and flies. I guess since the weather was hot, it sped up the process of decomposition. Those things that flew at the AC were burnt and cooked maggots. An officer came by and filled us in. My coworker vomited. The smell of death is strong. It is ridiculously hard to get rid if you can at all. No matter how hard we cleaned, I am sure there would have been residue somewhere. But maybe the truck was never meant to be sold again. Maybe it was just a smell that is not possible to remove. But it was a horrible experience, and I am sure the officer had it much, much worse. So first off, I would like to say that this is 100% true. Now, weirdly, while this whole story involves me, I did not witness a thing. So, some pretext. I have been vacationing at private campgrounds my entire life. My family owns property in the Mohawk Trails not too far from Heath, Massachusetts. Absolutely beautiful land, historic property. Everywhere you go, you can see stone structures and property lines dating all the way back to the time of the Mohawk Indians. Like I said, I'd been camping here my entire life, and still do to this day. Nothing ever happened, paranormal at least, until this time. Go back for about 5 years. My brother still calls this my Skimwalker story, although I'm not totally convinced. It is weird though. So 5 years ago, I, my brother, my 2 cousins, we were all camping for a weekend. It was very calm and peaceful. I was at the private lake fishing off the dock, not catching anything good. I caught a pickerel and tossed it in the woods, continued fishing, and then suddenly I hear, "Josh?" my name, come from the right side of the dock a good distance away. Now where the dock was, if I looked right, I could see an expanse of land that wraps around the lake. But there were trees and shrubs blocking my view of that path. That is where the voice was coming from. At least that's what I thought it was. I recognized it as my little brother, so I call back, "I'm on the dock." I see him around the corner, and he stares at me bewildered. He looks back in the woods and then back at me, so I asked him, "What's up?" "Were you just in the woods?" Like running through the woods?" He looked absolutely insane in his eyes. "No," I spoke. "How could I be there and be back here so quickly?" I replied. He looked back and then back at me again. "Dude, I just saw you there, but you were running that way." He points back in the direction he came from. "But I could not hear twigs snapping or leaves rustling. That's the weird part," he spoke. And mind you, back then I was around 290 pounds. I was a very big guy. I am now down to 210, and even now I am still pretty big. But that is besides the point. Now remember how I said I threw a fish in the woods? I then realized I could no longer hear it flopping around. I threw it around 5 or so minutes prior, so I go to look for it. This thing was absolutely gone. I searched a whole 30-foot or so radius. It was just gone. There was no sign of animal life coming through and grabbing it. So, it was a very odd thing, and to this day, my bro tells the story to people. But then that same day, my mother comes up to me at our site and asks me, "Josh, did you go into the female shower room at the rec hall?" She was pretty upset. I said, "No, are you insane? Why would I go in there?" Apparently, she was trying to find an explanation because I found out a few days later she followed what she thought was me into the shower room, and this figure was nowhere to be seen. Lastly, something not really involving me. My 2 cousins were from different sides of the family, and they did not know each other all that well. So the last night we were there, my cousins, who we will call Carrie, wakes up in bed. The sun is beginning to rise. She turns over and sees my other cousin, Jose, sitting in a chair and listening to headphones staring out the window. So she turns back over to try to fall asleep. She can't. She feels uncomfortable since they do not know each other, so she turns back and he is completely gone. Later, it turns out he had never left his bed and he was still asleep the entire time. Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were rerouted away home we have never gone before, and have been traveling in basically the middle of nowhere for quite some time. My boyfriend's speedometer is broken on his car, and he must press the gas button to reset the miles after he gets gas. This will be especially important soon. We are driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolutely nowhere, with not one car in sight. My boyfriend realized we had hit the 130-mile mark on his odometer. We needed gas, but there was not one gas station in sight. I put the search for gas stations nearby, and we found one. It turned out to be closed. In a hurry, we found another gas station 5 minutes or so up the road. This is where the story begins to get very weird. My boyfriend thought he closed his gas cap, and we are once again driving along this deserted road in the middle of nowhere. We heard a loud bang and he realized he forgot to put the gas cap back on, so we are driving around the dark looking for the gas cap. He finally pulls over and realizes somehow the gas cap is still attached to the car. We get back on track and get to another gas station. Out of nowhere, I had a horrible thought about something going wrong at that gas station. I pushed it aside because I knew he needed gas and AAA is not really an option where we're at. We get to this gas station and the lights are kind of on. They're incredibly dim. This road literally leads to a dead end with a gas station on it. The only way to leave this area was to turn left or go straight out of the gas station. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas, and the feeling intensified. I have literally never felt that in my entire life. My stomach dropped into my butt. I have been in very disturbing situations, such as almost being kidnapped twice, being followed home, watching someone being taken away in a body bag after being hit by a car, and even a couple of paranormal situations. I can talk about this sometime in the future, but I have never felt like this before. I saw a white car pulling up the road. Keep in mind, there's literally no one on this road and we haven't seen a single soul all night. He pulls up and notices my boyfriend and backs up with his windows down. I found this pretty strange, because my boyfriend has a very nice sports car, and my mind immediately went to panic mode. Maybe I was just paranoid at that point, I don't know. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car, me, and turned left and sped off. Sadly, I didn't get his license plate because of how dark it was. The situation frightened me more than anybody can imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it is easily one of the most terrifying things to watch because I didn't know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought I had just 10 minutes earlier are what also made the situation even more creepy to me. We found a gas station with actual human life around, and we made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that that road we were driving on was famous for many bodies being found on it. I hope no one ever gets put in this situation. Be safe out there, my friends. I live somewhere in upstate Pennsylvania, McKean County to give a generalization. Now, I have multiple stories that I could say, and since they are all short, I will try to tell them all. Well, this first incident happened a while back. I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and it was about 11 p.m. I was trying to get to bed because of a science test I had the next day, and was trying to get to sleep. Remember the keyword at 11 p.m. This house is extremely quiet, and if you wanted to, you could drop a pin on my kitchen floor and hear it. Well, I am lying in bed, and suddenly, I hear a quick, "Bryce," from outside of my room. This was at the point where I was still scared of the dark and slept with a nightlight. I didn't really close my door either at night. I listened again, and nothing came for the rest of the night, and I eventually fell asleep. That is not the end of the story, though. The next day, I was in my science class taking my test. The room is again extremely quiet. I hear the "Bryce" from the whispering voice from somewhere. I look up and look around. Everyone is busy doing their test and no one else seemed to hear it. The interesting part of the story, though, was that weekend, I was at my grandma's and I told her all about it. She said my cousin had been hearing the same thing. I do not know if I was hearing things or if it was a ghost, but if so, I believe it is gone now. This next story happened to me when I was a bit younger. I own 30 acres of land, and some of it has logging roads, and I'm a bit of a hiking freak, and I like making forts and stuff like that. So it was normal for me to be outside, and being out in the middle of nowhere had its perks. Well, I had just started my trek up the hill when I stopped to take a quick break. I sat down and laid my pellet rifle across my lap when I heard the screams of my sister and brother. They were screaming my name. I heard it twice in a row if I remember correctly. I screamed back, but there was no response. Now let me put into perspective where I was. I was above a dirt road, which was probably a couple of 100 feet from my house. I could not see down this dirt road or up it either, so I had no idea if anyone was actually there. After screaming "what" a few times and getting no response, I started moving downhill when a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. Running. Not normal running, fast-paced, heavy-footed running. This was not something my brother or my sister was capable of. Fear struck over me, for I could not see what was running up the dirt road. After a minute, the running stopped. I slowly made my way downhill. I made it to my house, and my mom was in the living room. I asked, "What?" and she looked at me puzzled and asked what I wanted. I said someone was calling my name. It sounded like my sister and brother, not saying their actual names. Then, the most chilling words came from my mother's mouth. "Your sister and brother are in their rooms. They haven't been outside all day." There is one more scary event that happened to me when I was younger as well. I believe I was about 5 years old at the time. One morning I woke up at maybe 5 or 6 a.m. I was scared to get out of bed though. There were large, heavy-footed noises coming from outside my house. Remember, we live out in the middle of nowhere surrounded by woods and hills. These were not human footsteps though. They sounded so large, like maybe the feet of an angry Bigfoot. Why do I say angry Bigfoot? There is a legend around my town. It's called the Card Creek Monster or something like that. I've looked around and I haven't found much online, so I don't know what you can find if you look it up either. The only reason I know about it is that there's an article cut out my grandpa's house. If requested, maybe I can get the story of that legend from them. This happened to me in 2016, but I was having trouble sleeping tonight, and my brain dredged this up from my memories for whatever reason, so I wanted to send it into the show. I had recently moved back to my college town, so I could rent an apartment with a friend after a long-term relationship had recently ended. I was doing a lot of job hunting for pretty much anything as I was desperate for income and unsuccessful finding work within my career field. I was using multiple job sites, but mostly Indeed, because I like their website features. They help you track which jobs you've applied for and their status. There were of course some jobs that I applied for on their own websites, but I kept track. After a couple of weeks of searching, I get a call. I do not recognize the number, and the area code was not very familiar to me, but I picked it up as it might be a job prospect. A woman is on the end, and she says that she is calling to set up an interview as I applied for their company. The company's name was not something I remembered applying for. While on the phone with her, I quickly pulled up Indeed on my laptop and looked through all the jobs I had applied for. None matched. I have no idea what this job is, but I don't want to make this apparent on the phone, as I have been job searching for weeks and I am still unemployed. I asked her for the address of the building and write it down. Looking back, I cannot remember the name she gave me, but I do remember how pushy she was about scheduling an interview for that same evening. I agreed to the interview and thank her, but as I hang up, I get an unbelievably bad feeling. Something just does not feel right. I Google the phone number, and it is not linked to any company. I Google the address, and it's also not affiliated with any company. It is from way outside the distance of jobs that I was applying for as well, almost an hour away from where I lived. I pulled up Google Street View, and all I can see for the address she gave me is several smaller rundown buildings with a highway exit in the distance. It looked pretty desolate, in the middle of nowhere even. I pictured myself driving up there around dusk when she scheduled the interview, and I could physically feel this sensation of dread settle in me. I did not want to go. I brought all of this up to my roomie at the time, and he said I might be overthinking it, but if I was not comfortable with it, I should not go. I am so glad that I did not go. The more time passes, the more I am aware of just how shady it was. In hindsight, I wish I had gone to the police, but I did not at the time because the year prior, I had not much faith in them. I had tried to get a restraining order before an ex who was telling me to kill myself and harassing me from burner numbers. Who knows what could have happened if I had gone? It is a scary thought, though. I see all the time, especially locally where I live, of human trafficking busts being made with very similar things. Be safe online, whether it's on job sites, Craigslist, or just signs you see around town that look a little too sketchy. Please, be safe out there. During the early 2000s, when I was attending law school, I worked nights delivering pizza for one of the national chains. I had done something similar when I was younger and attending my local community college. Anytime I found myself sorely in need of quick cash, that avenue was what I would choose. Despite the many stories I have heard questioning the safety of the job, I never had a single run-in with a thief or anything otherwise. I am sure back in the early days it could have been a bit more dangerous, but by the time I joined the game, companies had learned that implementing practices such as limiting the driver to $20 in cash lowered the chances of, holdups and being robbed drastically. Even though I was never a victim of a robbery, I do have one or two scary incidents I could share. The worst of these happened back in the early 2000s. I was awfully familiar with the city I was living in at the time. Moving there after junior college and delivering for several places over the last 5 years had made me very intimate with almost every nook and cranny of this place. However, one evening I would be called to an address that I, nor any of my other drivers, even know existed. When the order came in, I went straight to the map to find the address. but it was not there. Not even the GPS on my phone showed it. We did not have any no delivery areas at the time, so I had to take it despite my misgivings. Theoretically, the place would have existed if the road continued for 10 more blocks, so I turned on to said road and a block before it is ending and followed it south. Sure enough, a newly paved road began where the old one should have ended. For what seemed like miles, I continued on this new section of road. Nothing stood on either side of the road, and I did not seemingly pass another car the entire time. How the state managed to build it without a single report of its creation leaking to the media had me absolutely bewildered. The 5 years that I had been driving all over the city, I had not known this part existed. In one way, I was overly excited seeing all of it, like a Victorian explorer tracing the source of the Nile. But at the same time, a deserted road popped up out of nowhere. This gave me a chill down my spine. It must have been a good 10 minutes before the house in question appeared in the distance. I could not understand for the life of me why someone would build a house out here in the middle of nowhere with no way to really reach it. When I got closer, I could see the house had to be at least 50 years old or more, and probably had not been repaired since then. No cars were around, and for a moment, I thought the house was abandoned, but I could see the front door wide open behind the rickety old screen. Everything looked to be above board, so I grabbed the pizza and headed for the door. I knocked on the screen door but got no answer. I could see what appeared to be a young female walking around the kitchen. When I knocked a second time, I heard a female voice say to come in. Despite my reservations, I stepped just inside the house and waited in the small foyer. I had learned from the other drivers early on not to enter an unfamiliar house, but I had yet to see anything that concerned me. I assumed the woman will be coming out soon to pay me. Instead, I overheard an unseen man whisper, "Call him into the kitchen." When I heard that, I fled from the place as fast as I could. I was so freaked out I got back to the restaurant in half the time it took me to get to the house. After I told my boss what had happened, he called the police. All the excitement had me rattled, so my boss sent me home for the day. My phone rang a few hours later. It was the police. They had called me to let me know what they had found. Whoever had been there was gone now, even though the place had more than likely been abandoned for a while. They did find evidence that people had just recently been inside. This was stuff my boss had already told them. However, they did shed light on where the road came from and why the house was the only building on this deserted road. The state had been trying to purchase the land on which the new section of road and the house were on for 20-something years, but the landowner would not sell. They even tried to use eminent domain to get it, but a judge blocked it. Around 2 years before the owner had passed away, his children finally sold the land to the state. They were so happy to get the land after all that time, the construction on the road was started immediately. It technically had yet to be formally opened, but locals had already begun using it anyway. This was good to know, but I still wondered how the two people knew about the empty house sitting out in the middle of nowhere. This was something the officer did not quite know. We can only assume they drove past it and decided it would be a good place as any to ambush a delivery driver. Even $20 is a good score if you're desperate enough, I guess. He said from personal experience, people had definitely killed for much less. The officer left me with one good piece of news though. The county had slated the old house to be demolished in the coming weeks. So, no other poor delivery driver would be let out there to be robbed, or maybe even worse. 2 days later, I was driving down the brand new road, which I was now using as a shortcut to cut across town, and witnessed the house destruction. A load was being lifted from my shoulders right before my eyes. Never again would I have to enter a customer's home, or even deliver to an area in which I was not very well versed. Perhaps in the future, I will share my other story. While not as harrowing, it was still scary, nonetheless. So, I'm a female, and this happened when I was young, probably about 14 years old. My life had gone haywire, and I did not spend a lot of time at home. My parents had filed for divorce, during which time my mother had kind of lost it and had allowed me to do pretty much whatever I wanted, since she was going through a pretty rough time on her own. Then, my dad suddenly moved back in, and that all became different. Everything came to a screeching halt. I honestly was not too cool with it, so my reaction naturally was to stay gone doing whatever I wanted to anyway, as much as possible, which ended up getting me literally thrown out of the house permanently, but that is a whole other story. So I had 2 friends that I hung out with normally that were about 4 years older than me and had just graduated high school. At the time, I think I was still lying to them about how old I actually was. They were both 18 and I told them I was 16 when I was only 14. Anyway, we planned a camping trip without any definite destination, but being that we lived in Colorado Springs, the mountains and vast possibilities for potential camping spots were pretty much a hop, skip, and a jump away. So we headed west into the mountains into 2 separate vehicles, and with several other people. One of which was this gigantic guy that I did not like much, but we always kept him around for some reason. He always gave me the creeps, and since this guy was like 25 years old or more, and this probably happened about 25 years ago at this point, I cannot honestly remember his name, so we will call him Brian. About halfway up this mountain, one of my 2 friends realizes she left something important back home and needs to turn back to go retrieve it. Me and my other friend, and our carload of people including Brian, continue our way up. We make it to the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and still have no clue where we are going to camp. So, we are wandering around the woods on dirt roads with civilization a distant memory. Our car eventually breaks down, and to make matters worse, right around this time it begins to rain. But since we were already prepared to camp, that is what we were going to do. Brian is sitting with us the next morning and pulls out a handgun and says he stole it from the parents of one of the girls that is using the vehicles. Brian goes from being creepy to being downright scary, because not only does this guy seem to have a noticeably short fuse, but now we also know he is armed with a deadly weapon, and we are stranded in the middle of nowhere with him. So we all decided, without Brian, that we would just watch what we say to this guy and try to keep him from blowing a fuse. All of us are now muddy and dirty from setting up tents in the rain on the side of the road. We decided we should not just sit here and hope that the other caravan returns. We pack up our gear and get back on the road and wait for someone to actually find us and pass us. Eventually, we realize that not a soul was going to pass us. So we start walking, all 4 of us, and all of our camping gear is on our backs, until we make it to a paved road. After an hour or 2, a truck finally comes into view on the highway, and we all flag them down. We explain what was happening, and we ask for a ride to a phone. The guy was gracious and loads us all into his truck with our gear and everything. We finally make it to a phone and call our friend, who tells us for some reason, I cannot remember now, that she decided just to not go with us and stay in town. But she does agree to come where we are and pick us up. When we all finally make it back, the friend that came to get us said she had all spoken to the girl whose parents Brian had stolen the gun from, who had been in her car, and she told her that Brian had gone on the camping trip with us because he had shot and killed someone with that gun, and he was trying to hide out. I imagine that had been the actual reason for her deciding not to come, but it had also left the rest of us stranded in the middle of nowhere with a serial killer still armed with his murder weapon. Thankfully though, we all finally made it back to civilization, unscathed, alive, and I believe the guy did end up being arrested a short time after that. But man, did I realize I had literally been stranded in the middle of nowhere with a murderer for 3 days. It hit me like a ton of bricks,